This is part 2 of the Chapter 5 companion video talking about sound classes and audio volumes. And in this part, we are going to talk about occlusion. Make sure that if you haven't done the first video, you do the first video, because you need to have a sound class in your environment in order for occlusion to work. It will 100% not work until you make a sound class and apply it to your sounds. So what is occlusion? You notice occlusion in everyday life. You just might not know that that is the word for it. So an example of sound occlusion would be if you're in a classroom and you're focusing, maybe you're taking a test and it's really quiet in the class, but then there's somebody really loud outside in the hallway and you can hear them, but it doesn't sound like they're right inside the room with you. It's usually kind of lower in volume and it's kind of muffled sounding because the walls would be kind of blocking that sound. You could still hear it, but there's some blocking going on. And that's what occlusion is that there's large environmental objects in the way that's stopping those sound waves from hitting you 100%. So that sort of muffled sort of sound is what we're talking about when we're talking about audio occlusion. And we do that by setting up audio volumes in Unreal and having certain settings. Keep in mind with this, when you're setting up your occlusions, you kind of have to be really thoughtful about it. And they have to be set up in very specific sort of ways because it's dealing with volumes again. The example I'm going to work with is in this map in this back large room that at the end of, in the previous video, we worked with a bank vault that was down at this end, but down at the other end is like this big open room that has this generator in there. I went ahead and created a generator sound, and my sound cue isn't any more interesting than this, but I do want to make kind of a note. I did figure out how to kind of fix that blipping that you get sometimes with looping waves, at least better than it was. So rather than using a looping node, select the wave in your sound cue and check looping on, and it kind of fixes that weird, like, noticeable blip in it. I did kind of mix it with a bit of a modulator just to get a little bit more of an interesting sort of sound, and did like an asynchronous loop with this. So my cue sounds like this. And it's just, repeating itself. And I already have it placed in the environment with my attenuation all set and ready to go. But if we play this, and let's jump in, it's a pretty loud noise because generators are really loud and obnoxious. But if we had something like this giant pillar and we walk behind it, it should really be kind of occluding that. Same thing if we were to go, into this room. We'll pretend there's like glass on this window a little bit. Or even if it's, walking into the room, it should get quieter. Especially if we went in this room, we should barely be able to hear it. And we really don't want to try to have to set up like a bunch of weird attenuation. Like, it's not really going to work. So working with occluding volumes is what we want to do. So first things first, make sure you have your sound in the environment, or else it's not, or set up so that it plays in your level, or else it's not going to work. You can't really test this stuff with doing this. At least I don't think it does. We can double check real quick. I still don't think this works because I think the physical character has to be inside the volume in order for occluding to work. But we'll do a check just to make sure. I have my cue that's in the world, and I did set that cue to be in the class that I made, the sound class that I created in the previous video that had all those specific settings checked. So if you didn't do that part, I would go back to that video and make sure that you make the sound the sound class the same. So let's actually set up our occluding volumes. It's just saving real quick. And we just use the same audio volume that we used when we were doing our reverb. But I'm going to actually place this now behind this pillar. So it's not going to include this sound. We want to set these up so that they are where the players should be standing if we're hearing that sort of block. So we do need to make sure that, well, we're going to turn off reverb. First things first, let's turn off reverb since that's not what this is. But let's make sure that this is a good size. We want to make sure it's tall enough. So if we jump, oh, that was way too tall. I hate how Unreal does that sometimes. So if we jump, we don't accidentally get out of the volume, and I always like to sink it ever so slightly into the floor to make sure that we are standing in it. You know, we probably don't want it to be wider than this, but we can make it a little bit wider. Let's see. There we go. And we want to push it back as far as you think it would go, because you'd have to think about in real life, you know, it's, if we think about sound waves bouncing around, would it go all the way back to the wall? Maybe not, because we'd probably start to hear it again once we back up this far. But if we're really right up next to it, it should be kind of blocking it. Let's make sure we name this. We'll call it Occlusion or OCC Pillar 1, because we might have other occlusion volumes in here. You probably should if you do. And let's make sure that we have a good priority. I'm going to set this at least a priority, maybe like a 2. I don't think I'll have any others, but unless we're doing like an overall volume, I really don't like setting it to 1. I don't know. It's just, I always save 1 as if we're making a giant one. And we really don't need that for occlusion, but it's just a habit. Priority, again, works just like any other priority, and we're going to get into doing a nested occlusion after we do this basic one. So we have that ready to go, and what we want to look at to set up the occlusion is right here, this ambient zone settings. And what this is it's looking at sound cues or other sound items to see, and they're either going to be inside or outside. So, this would be an exterior volume, and something in here would be an interior volume. So if we look at the settings, an exterior volume, like we could even let's just first lower this. So we'll put it really extreme just so we can hear a difference. So we'll put it at 0.1. And let's see how much of a difference this makes. So I feel like we need to, do we need to compile this? I think it might be okay. Build, we might need to build something. Let's just try building geometry just in case. I feel like it gets kind of weird if we don't. Don't quote me on that though. But let's try it. So it's pretty loud. And let's walk into that volume. Do you see how it cuts out? It's extreme. It probably wouldn't cut out that much, but we can at least tell that it's working. So now that we know that everything's kind of set up correctly, we can set this to sound a little bit better. So let's go back and select that. And let's take a look at some other settings. So volume is obvious. And let me put that closer to maybe we'll try like a 0.5. Exterior time is how long it takes to go from, one to the other. So what's the fade time? Usually 0.5 is probably good enough. It might need to go a little bit faster. I don't know. I usually don't mess with that too much. Usually 0.5 is pretty good. So exterior LPF, this one is really important. And if we hover over it, we can get some information. The desired LPF, and that stands for low pass filter, frequency cutoff in hertz of sounds outside the volume when the player's inside. So you need to have a little bit of understanding of frequency to understand what this means. If you remember, frequency is how high-pitched or low-pitched a sound is. So if we cut out higher frequency sounds, we're going to get something that sounds kind of muffled, because it's going to almost sound like if you were talking into a pillow, or like you're hearing something through that, because all those high-end sounds are going to get filtered out. So this is how we can affect, you know, how much that sounds. So let's see, I think it's at 20K hertz. Let's just do it really extreme so you can really hear it. So I'm going to cut it down to 5,000 hertz. Since it's a generator, it kind of already has a lot of low, not too much high frequency. So we're going to really cut it down so it's very obvious. So we're standing here. Is that kind of obvious? Let me keep the sound up. Maybe a little bit easier to hear. Let's change that sound back to 1. And we'll set the low pass filter to like 1,000. Let's see. So keeping it volume, but we're cutting it. There we go. You can definitely hear those high-end noise, you know, those high-frequency noises being cut now. And that's usually what happens when you are occluding is, you know, with the analogy of you're in a classroom and you hear someone in the hall, it sounds muffled. So it was a little bit extreme. Let's change that volume down to like a 0.75 and maybe have it a low pass at like that 5,000. And that's probably going to be pretty good. Let's try it. That's pretty good. So keep in mind that this is for all sounds outside of this volume. So that would mean that if you had a sound over here that's not in that volume, it would also be occluded. We could make adjustments to that based on your sound class. So like if you had sounds that you never wanted to occlude ever because it really wouldn't make sense, it would have its own separate sound class that wouldn't allow for those audio volumes to take into effect. It can get kind of messy, but this is a really useful sort of tool, and you would only really want to do this for like your really big sounds, since if it's a little sound, it might just be taken care of with just your you know, attenuation. But when you have big giant sounds that permeate areas, setting up occlusion for it can really be helpful. So let's talk a little bit about, like, you have one, let's duplicate it over, and let's also do some nested. So once I have this one kind of set up, I could easily copy and paste this and just move it over to the next one, so that we have occluding going on behind here, so that if all our big sounds are over here, if we're standing over here, you know, technically this one probably should be over here if that generator's on that side. So maybe something more like that. But what about this room right here? Because, like, let's say that this is going to be glass. So if we're standing, you know, if we're in the doorway, it's not really going to be occluding. Well, I guess we won't go that deep. But if we're standing here, it should be quieter. And then when we move in front of the window and get kind of close to it, it should be louder, but not like a full volume. So we're going to want to nest these. So let's create our audio volume. And I'm going to call this one OCC window room main. And let me adjust the size of this. Well, I'm going to give it a priority of 2. And let's make sure reverb is turned off. Let's adjust the size. This one we do want to fit nicely in here. Oops. Let's go this way. And let's make sure it's tall enough now. And let's give it some settings. So we're going to pretend that it's going to get occluded kind of nicely. So let's go and let's cut the volume, maybe like that 0.75, and we'll put the low pass filter. Actually, let's do it a little bit more extreme. We'll do 0.5. No pass filter of 5,000. And let's double check that this is working. We'll pretend like the door closes. There actually was a door model on here, but whoever designed this made the door too small, so the character didn't actually fit in. So it gets loud, it gets quieter. We want to add an extra one now so that if you're standing by the window, it gets a little bit louder though. So we have our first one. I might even just copy this one, just it's kind of in the spot I need. So I'm going to select that one, Control C, Control V, and rename it OCC window room window. I want to make sure I give this a priority of 3. Since this is going to be nested inside of the main one and with a priority of 2, if we're standing right in front of that window, we want it to override. We want it to pick that one rather than the main one. And if you remember, it's kind of like cookies. The engine wants 3 cookies. It doesn't want just 2 cookies. So we'll make sure, oops, I'm going the wrong way with that one. Let's try this one. There we go. And we'll move this closer to the window. Let's shrink it up a little bit more. That should be pretty good. We don't want to go outside. Okay, yeah, that'll work. And now let's make our adjustments to the ambient zone. So if it's in front of the window, we'll have it be a little bit louder, and we'll have it be not quite cutting off so much of our frequencies. So full volume. Gets quieter. And then we go in here, and it's a little bit louder. We back away from the window. We go up to the window. So it's kind of a nice way to kind of really push our sounds to be even more realistic. So the big takeaway, if this is not working, make sure that you did create a sound class and you set whatever sound in your level that you're trying to occlude to this sound class. You need to make sure that apply ambient volumes is checked, or else it's not going to work. Because if you look, what we're messing with is the ambient zones. So we need to make sure that those are working correctly. So that's going to be it for this video. And in the next video, we'll wrap it up. I think the last thing is to talk a little bit about attaching sounds to objects, so that we can, rather than placing them in the world with an object, we'll attach a sound to that. So that'll be part 3 of this series.